Welcome to another CHRO Conversation, hosted by the Center for Executive Succession at the Darla Moore School of Business. I'm your host, Anthony Nyberg, and today we are speaking with Kevin Cox. Kevin has been the CHRO of the iconic American Express Company since 2005, and he has served as a board member on multiple publicly traded companies. Kevin, thank you very much for coming down to join us again. We always appreciate having you here on campus.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm looking forward to this.
So one of the things that I've often heard you talk about is the importance of HR in making organizations grow and in helping them change. Can you say a little bit about what that means to you?
Sure. I was trained really in what I would call an active form of HR. It was always taught to me to be on offense, not on defense as it relates to being in HR. So that sort of forms how I think about that question of driving change. I don't believe that it's our job in HR just to administer the change or to sort of execute the change. Sometimes I think, maybe to your question, our job is to agitate for the change or to be almost an activist and try to drive that change. That's how I think about it, very much as a hands-on, something needs to be different, something needs to be better, more effective. I think part of our job is to make that happen.
So the idea of an active HR, that's a really interesting concept. Can you give us any examples of what you mean by that?
A couple come to mind. One of them very, very current to me at American Express right now. A new CEO comes into an organization, as we had a CEO succession earlier this year. That CEO wants to do some things intentionally to change the culture. That's change. And so I believe my job is to work with that new CEO to try to first of all, decide what changes make the most sense, to figure out the best ways to make that happen, figure out how fast to make that happen, think a lot about how to sustain the change we want to make happen so it's not just a kind of a one-and-done situation. That's an example that we're going through right now, intentional change. And think about the levers that we have in HR to drive change. Obviously, we have performance management as a lever. I think that matters. We have compensation. I think that matters. We have talent management, who's in what job, I think that matters. We have learning, how do organizations learn, the training, et cetera. So to me, I think we have a lot of levers that we can use and should use to try to drive this change. That's one. So another example of change is, let's say a business unit or a division is underperforming, either relative to its own expectations or its competitors or something like that. I feel like an HR leader's job is to work with the division head and figure out why is that performance not where it needs to be and what do we need to do to make those changes happen. And I think, again, we have many, many levers, many arrows in our quiver, if you want to think about it that way, to really drive that kind of change. A CEO once told me, Kevin, what's really unique about HR is you have this tremendous vantage point, this view of the entire field that most other groups don't have. You see the way the teams operate together. You see things others don't see. You just have perspective. And that always stuck with me, that I think that is both a gift that we have in HR and I believe it's a responsibility we have in HR. Sometimes we're the coach up in the box looking at the field and watching how plays develop, how things work and how things don't work. And we're in an excellent spot to be able to figure out what we need to do to drive better performance. That's how I think about it.
This is really interesting because this is certainly not the way most outsiders think of HR. And I think what you've just described as being an active leader in the organization is that you're constantly having to look out to see what the organization needs to perform better in the marketplace and then proactively making these, trying to affect the business going forward?
I think the proactive is the most important word in that phrase. You can't, well, you can, but I don't believe you should wait until these problems are sort of so large that they can sometimes be insurmountable. I think we have a chance to be an early warning system, a chance. I mean, think about it. We're spending time, if we're doing our jobs right, with the top talent. They're sharing with us what's working, what's not working. We know a lot about team dynamics. We sit in senior team meetings. We watch those things happen. We have our own metrics that we're looking at in terms of what's going on with attrition, what's going on with time to fill, what's going on with engagement. So we have data, we have instincts, we have experiences, and we have this vantage point that this CEO talked about. Who else has all of that. And I really do think it's not just something we can do. I think it's something we should do more of in HR.
Another area where I know you're passionate about is the healthcare and the state of healthcare in the country and in the world, and particularly helping your employees get appropriate healthcare in an efficient way. Can you share a little bit about why that's so important to you and what it means to help employees get that healthcare efficiently?
Healthcare to me is a very personal. It's unlike kind of any other decision that I think we're making in corporations. We are all buying lots of things all the time, whether it's a training program or it's a consulting engagement or something like that. Healthcare, first of all, is personal. It is about lives. It is about quality of life, and that really matters to me. We've done a lot at American Express in healthcare. Many companies have done quite a bit around that. I'm proud of what we do in things like wellness. The biggest change is focusing more on prevention and putting more of our resources and our attention on prevention as opposed to only thinking about treatment. And I would say in this country, that is the biggest shift I think that the entire healthcare field needs to make, is toward more focus on prevention, focus on outcomes, as opposed to focus on treatment. So it means a lot to me in that way. If we're honest, a lot of HR people look at their benefits line or their healthcare spend, and they try to do everything they can to make sure that it isn't any bigger or any worse next year than it was this year. And that's certainly the minimum that I think we ought to be doing. What we really can be doing, and maybe should be thinking about more of, is how do we really change those trends in a fundamental way? So this group I put together that's called the HTA, the Health Transformation Alliance, is a group of nearly 50 companies that believe we are better off working together to drive this kind of innovation than any one of us can do ourselves. And it's pretty interesting where we're going with things. It has a lot packed around data and the use of all of this data, the way every company is using data in every other part of their business. What can we learn from our healthcare data that helps us think about things differently? There is a ton of innovation going on, and what I'm hoping to do is create an ecosystem where the best innovation externally flows into this organization, and we help scale and bring that innovation to market more quickly. I'm excited about what that can do for our members and for the country overall.
So HTA is really a remarkable group, and one of the first groups, I think, that's certainly of that size to take on this healthcare challenge from the business perspective. Can you say a little bit more about why is it that businesses need to take on this responsibility more, and what is the potential outlook for this?
What I had to learn, and I'm embarrassed it took me so many years to learn this, is employer-provided health care is where all of the profit margin in the healthcare system really resides. Medicare and Medicaid in the U.S., that's where all the volume resides, right? So there are many, many, many lives there. But if you talk to providers, you talk to CEOs of hospital systems, and they're honest with you, they'll tell you that mostly they may break even on those government-provided programs, or in some cases lose money on them, and they make money on the employer-provided benefit. So I don't feel exploited by that. I actually feel like if we are the profit source for healthcare, we have this responsibility and this opportunity to talk about this in a very different way. When that became clear to me, and as I said, it became clear later than I wish it had, I said, if we don't drive this change as employers, this change won't happen. Politically, things could happen, or they may not happen. But from a commercial standpoint, we've got the data, we've got the profit margin, the market will pay attention to employers. One very senior medical person that I spoke with about this, when I first came to him with this idea, he looked at me and he said, I've been waiting for this for 20 years. He goes, what took you so long to think about this idea? Why hasn't the employer community shown up in a bigger way? And he's right. But I think we're making good strides, and I'm optimistic about where this is going to go.
So along these lines still, because I know it is, again, one of the things you're passionate about, it sounds like, certainly there's a strong business case for getting this handled, and that's what we mostly hear in the press. But you talk about it from a really personal way. That's how you started this,
Yeah.
about it affecting their lives in a positive way. What is the balance, maybe on a bigger scale, from a HR perspective, about driving the business success, and in this case it's related to benefits, and helping people's lives be better?
Well, I tend to personalize a lot of these big ideas that we all talk about and have are great, but to me I try to ground them. So for me, I needed to make this real for an employee of American Express, and I call her Lucy. She is a sort of an amalgam of lots of people that I've met in my travels, but Lucy is a single mom, and Lucy struggles with the basic affordability of healthcare. And although American Express is proud of the benefits that it offers, if we continue to pass more and more of this increasing cost on to Lucy, I worry about Lucy. I worry that she maybe doesn't take the medicine she ought to be taking. She skips the appointments she doesn't feel like she can afford. And she may ultimately not take as good a care of herself as I think she should. Lucy's life may be negatively affected if she makes those decisions. Her son's life might be negatively affected if they make that decision. And so that's how I think about the changes I'm trying to drive in healthcare overall ultimately affect individuals like Lucy. And that keeps me grounded. It keeps me thinking I am doing this for the overall effectiveness of healthcare. I am doing this for the member company P&L. But I started to do this because I didn't think that Lucy could continue down this path indefinitely without hitting a wall, and that would be a pretty painful wall. I don't want her to hit that, and I believe we can make the changes and have her not have that day of reconciliation.
As yet another area of expertise that you have unique insight into, it's sitting on public boards. Can you say a little bit about why there are so few HR leaders that are on public boards, and I want to talk a little bit more about that?
That's a question that's hard to answer with facts, so this is very much opinion or instinct. I think I start off with the fact that when I've led board searches before, networks are really important. So it starts with how many HR leaders are active in broader business networks other than just groups of HR people. Because quite often, when somebody's doing a board search, it's really important that they have a reputation that's known by one or two members of that board. So if you're a CHRO that isn't known by broad CEOs or broader industry groups, it's going to be harder for you to kind of be in at the top of the slate. So that's one. Number two, and this is probably the biggest point to me, these days it's important for board members to be very broad-gauged. You can't just be the technology voice on a board, or the cybersecurity voice, or the marketing voice, or the finance voice, or the HR voice. The kinds of decisions that you're faced with on a board these days, ESG kinds of issues, go-to-market kinds of questions, technology disruption, mergers and acquisitions, balance sheet, best use of capital. These are all questions that come up on any fine day in any given boardroom. An HR person has to be able to hold their own and participate in those broad discussions and the things that they come to expect for. Of course, we ought to know a lot about executive compensation and talent management and succession. But those are just the starter points. I think you have to be pretty broad-gauged. And the third reason that I think it hasn't happened, lots of the power structure in lots of boards did not necessarily come up at a time when HR was playing as strong a role as they play in many organizations today. So their memory and our reputation with that group isn't as strong as it needs to be. That's changing. So as that generation of boards retire, and they're replaced with younger board members who maybe have experienced this modern HR that we're talking about today, I feel like this trend will increase. I don't think it will be radical in its movement, but I think it'll be much faster than it has been.
Because it sounds like the things that you said a good board member needs are the things that come when you talk about active HR. It is that broad understanding of being able to drive the business. So
yeah, if you're involved in the strategy discussions at your company, and I don't mean just executing the strategy that some other people have decided to do, but if you're participating in the creation of that strategy. That's a good proxy for what it might be like in a boardroom where you're debating the hard questions that we all debate around strategy. If you're not currently involved in that, if that's not how you practice HR in your own organization, then it's hard to imagine how you would add sort of disproportionate value to a public company board.
And presuming that you're someone that has this broad knowledge and engagement, is there something that HR that have been steeped in HR can bring to a board that's unique from other board members?
And this is the part that is the strongest thesis, I think. We really should know more about talent management than just about anybody around that table. Don't always, and there's some CEOs who are extraordinary at that. But I think we probably ought to hold ourselves a standard that we understand high potential development, high potential identification. So there's a whole talent stream that I think we add a lot of value into. Compensation is the other area, and I think that probably goes without saying. But the third one that I would like to just touch on, culture is actually trending, I think, in a big way right now. There was a time when culture, I think, was viewed as soft or ethereal, kind of hard to put your hands around. And I think more and more people are awakening the fact that culture is a huge lever, and it's very closely related to company performance. And so to me, we're coming to this world where there's an intersection between talent, strategy, and culture. And the middle part of that Venn diagram is fascinating to me. It's a fertile ground that I really hope we do more with. Who, besides a great head of HR, understands how those three pieces come together as well? I think we have a unique role to play in a boardroom in that relationship.
I've heard you discuss a lot about why talent is important and that talent is a driving force in organizational success. But can you say a little bit more about what may seem obvious to many people, and that being why talent is important?
I think talent is important as it relates to execution and strategy. So let's start at the top. Strategy. I think that you and I could probably get together and spend a few hours and come up with a strategy about how, for example, the University of South Carolina might beat Georgia in a football game in a couple weeks. I think we could think that through. I think we could come up with a credible approach to a game like that might actually cause us to win that game. But then it all turns into execution. So we would have a strategy. The question would become, do we have the talent that we need at the key positions to make that strategy happen? And is the talent package kind of symmetrical to the strategy? That's how I think about the two. So to me, strategy without execution is just a great conversation. And it's important, and I think it's a starting point. But execution really flows from the talent that you have. Key people in critical roles, if I had to make it as simple as I could, you have a great talent strategy if you have your most talented professionals in the roles that make the biggest difference to the strategy you're trying to pull off. That's why I think talent matters.
So thinking about it from an HR professional's perspective, what are the things that you're looking for that identify to you an HR person with potential or who actually has that talent?
My go-to on that has always been, and I think it's going to continue to be, I think about the Wizard of Oz. Nice and simple. If you are talking about brains, intellect, that's what the Scarecrow was looking for. That's a part of it. If you're talking about courage, the Cowardly Lion was looking for courage. And if you're talking about heart, the Tin Man was looking for heart. Give me an HR professional who has kind of an equal blend of intelligence, courage of their convictions, and heart, meaning kind of advocacy for doing what's right. And I think you've probably defined, in my mind, an ideal HR person. That's the general view. At American Express, there are 5 things we look at. There's a little bit of an overlap. Courage is definitely one of them. Authenticity. Are you who you say you are, and does your walk match your talk? That's important. Adaptability. Very dynamic. One of the things I love about HR is how constantly changing it is. No 2 days are the same. It requires somebody who has a reasonable level of adaptability to the situation. Insight. Like a doctor, the symptom isn't always the disease. And great HR people have a tendency to hear the symptom and listen to that, but also drive deeper to get to the root cause of what really might be going on. I think that's another important one. And then lastly, curiosity. I think great HR people are often looking at anything, whether it's a process or a problem, and they're wondering, could this be better? Is there a better way? Is there a different way to do this that would drive different outcomes? So if you give me that package and we look for people, actually I think about that when I decide who to hire and even who to promote. That served me pretty well in terms of predicting talent within HR.
So interestingly, all 5 of those things could apply to any field, I think.
I suppose. You know, I think I read a book a couple weeks ago where it focused on hire for character more than for sort of maybe characteristics or attributes, but would you be better off hiring for character? And when I read that, I thought maybe these 5 things that we call amplifiers in American Express are really examples of character, and I suppose they could apply to many other disciplines, most other disciplines. I hadn't thought about that, but you're probably right.
So one of the things you've now mentioned a number of times is courage.
Yeah.
What does that mean for an HR professional, and why is that so important?
Courage usually means putting something on the line, taking some risk. In the old days, it might mean putting your life on the line for a king or a country or a flag or something like that. I hope in HR we don't put our physical life on the line very often, but I'm reminded that the most courageous people that I know, I think about firemen, I think about soldiers, they actually are putting their life on the line for something bigger than they are, something that they believe in bigger than they are. Now, if you think about HR, I feel like what we often do is we put our reputation on the line. We take unpopular positions that kind of emperor has no clothes kinds of positions that leadership needs to hear, doesn't always want to hear, and doesn't always reward you for pointing that out. But I feel like we are trying to make, what I try to think about with Courage at American Express is I'm trying to make this company as great as it can possibly be. And I'm going to work really hard to try to give it every chance to be as great as I think its potential permits. Courage comes into play from time to time when you take those unpopular stances. And the most courageous people that I know are really clear about their purpose. They are very focused on what they're here to do. And I would say if you want to start down the courage journey, start with clarifying your purpose and making sure you're really clear what you're there to do, and let your courage flow from that.
I really want to go through this on all 5 points now because they're actually, your answers are always so interesting to me. So, but let's transition to CEO succession on this one. So I know CEO succession is a topic that you have great passion for. You've just gone through it quite successfully. Can you share a little bit of the lessons that you have learned during this process?
There are many, but if I had to sort of boil it down, and we'll go as deep as you want to go on this, the first one would be get as much help as you can afford. I think if you talk to most board members, they would tell you that it is the single most important thing they do is pick the CEO of the company. So there's a lot of heat, there's a lot of attention, there's a lot of expectation on that process. And my advice to my fellow HR folks who might be tuning in here is avail yourself of as much professional help as you can. You get help in executive comp with comp consultants. Controllers and accountants get help from outside audit firms. If this is really that important, consider the kind of help you might get. Center for Executive Succession is a good place to start with that. There are other individuals that can provide the support, or the network of those that you know who've gone through this before, which is one of the things that I did. Tap into that network. That maybe cost you a cup of coffee, but the wisdom, the battle scars, the watch outs are worth their weight in gold. So the first thing I would think about is really respect how challenging this is, how important it is to get it right, and take advantage of as much help as you can get. The second one is get roles clear. when there's something that's that important, everybody means well. You've got an incumbent CEO who cares what happens. You've got a chairman of a board who cares what happens. You've got a lead director who cares what happens. You care what happens as an HR person. You've got the candidates internally, hopefully, who care what's going to happen. Define the swim lanes and get that as clear as you possibly can. And part of your job, I think, as the showrunner of a process like this, is to make sure that people sort of remain in their lanes over a long period of time. So that's the second thing, get the rules clear. And the third thing is manage the timing of this. This is a subject that's really interesting to me. For as important as it is, sometimes boards want to run to it too fast because they're really worried about it and sometimes can panic about it. And you'll have members of the board who want to avoid that because it is that hard, it is that difficult, and it is that risky. So you've got some people who sort of want to dance a cha-cha and some people who want to dance a waltz. And part of your job is to kind of get the board to actually see the runway has this length. We are here in this process. We're aiming toward this particular event date and keeping everybody on the same page as you move through that. Not an easy thing to do, but I think it's a really important thing to do. And one of the most important parts of your role, I think, is to manage all of the drama, all of the energy, all of the good intentions. I mean, this is all coming from a really good place. But if you don't channel that energy and you don't channel that in a productive way, it can get away from you. That's something to watch out for as well.
So you touched on here this a little bit about the role of managing the expectations and the roles of others. Can you say more about what the role of you as the CHRO is during the succession process or going through the planning part of it also?
To some extent, you're an architect of it. And by that I mean you have these really important questions you have to talk about with your board. Are we going to be open to external candidates? You know, part of your job is to put that question on the table. If the answer is yes, part of your job might be to retain the firm that helps you think about that. Are you going to create a bake-off situation with your internal candidates? There are some boards who like that, some boards who don't care for that. You have to take a position on something like that. If you are going to lead an external search, you've got to lead the external search. The internal development, which is where I spent a lot of my time in American Express, is how do you get your internal candidates as ready as they can possibly be for the decision the board ultimately needs to make. And a lot of that is one-on-one coaching. You may use third parties, but again, part of my job is to make sure that our internal candidates were at their absolute best, ready to play kind of the game of their life. And I enjoyed that part of it, spent a lot of time with them thinking about that.
So it seems like a lot of effort and work on your part to balance the interests of current CEO, board members, potential candidates, maybe outside parties if that includes potential candidates, et cetera. How do you do that, knowing that each group at some level may have their own interests?
Well, they do have their own interests, and that's why I think it's back to this vantage point that the CEO told me about at one point. I'm neutral in this. In fact, you could argue I'm the most neutral of anybody in that process. That's a huge advantage. And to me, my neutrality, all I want is what's best for American Express. I'm not running somebody for office. I'm not in the race myself. I'm trying to figure out what the right answer is for the company. That neutrality is a huge advantage. Use it carefully, but certainly you want to use that. The other thing is, and you sort of allude to this, it's very consuming. I would say that I didn't accomplish too much other than CEO succession for the couple of years that led up to our event. I had a great team, have a great team, and I counted on them heavily. I leaned on them heavily to kind of keep all of our engines full ahead, while I personally managed a good bit of this with, again, my retiring CEO, my incoming CEO, and the board of directors of the company.
As always, Kevin, it is a great delight for me personally, a great honor for our school to have you down here, and on behalf of all of us here, thank you for joining.
You're welcome. Thanks. Fun to do it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You just listened to another CHRO Conversation. Today, Kevin Cox of American Express shared his views on a wide range of topics. As you heard, Kevin is an extraordinarily thoughtful person and a strong advocate for the importance of HR in driving business success. On behalf of all of us who are associated with the Master of Human Resources program and the Center for Executive Succession here at the University of South Carolina, thank you for joining us.